Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for making time for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you may be calling in from. My name is Anne Galumbe, and I'm the director of What Works to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls, which is an FCDO-funded program. I'll be co-hosting this webinar with some of my colleagues who work with me on this program. We have an hour and 45 minutes. The first hour will be spent on the presentation, and we'll give you 45 minutes to ask questions. But before we plunge into the presentation, I want to give my colleague Becky a chance to do some housekeeping and share some details on housekeeping. So over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Anne, and welcome everyone. Yeah, just a few very quick points from me before we get started on the presentations. Firstly, just to flag to everyone that this Zoom webinar is being recorded. Presentation, the PowerPoint presentation and the recording itself will be shared after this webinar on our website. So you should all be able to access it there. Please do feel free to share the recording and the presentation onwards with colleagues in your respective organizations and in your networks and anyone that you think might be interested in this opportunity. And just to flag as well, please be aware when you're asking questions and when you're speaking during this webinar that this is being recorded. So do be happy with that before you speak. In terms of the kind of agenda and how it will run through, and we'll take you through the full agenda in just a few moments, but as a very quick overview of the session today, we'll spend the first hour or so doing a presentation from the What Works team about the Scale Up grants under the What Works programme. We'll then spend the next 45 minutes or so taking all questions in a Q&A session. For the questions, please can I ask that anyone that has questions, please to type those in the Q&A box, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. It's a logo with two speech bubbles and the words Q&A underneath. Please type all questions in that box just so they're all in one place. We do ask that you use the chat only really to introduce yourself. Feel free to introduce who you are and which organization you're coming from today. And also feel free, if you're having any issues with this Zoom webinar, sound issues or issues with the interpretation or any problems, please feel free to put those in the chat. But if you can keep questions specifically to the Q&A box so we can see them all in one place, that would be best, please. And then final point from me is on interpretation. This webinar is being translated live. We've got two interpreters on the call into French and Arabic. So if either of those languages are needed, please feel free to use that functionality. The interpretation button is again at the bottom of the screen on Zoom. It's a logo of a sort of small globe with the words interpretation underneath it. You should be able to click that button and then select either French or Arabic, whichever language you need. And again, if you have any issues, please put those in the chat with either of those things. I think that's everything from me, so I'll pass back to Anne to start the presentation.
Thank you, Becky. And just to say that this is the second in a series of 3 webinars that we have planned. We had the first webinar last week when we spoke about the innovation grants. So today's webinar is going to focus on scale grants, and based on feedback from last week's webinar where some people indicated they had challenges with the login, we'll host another one tomorrow just to familiarize and socialize people with our web portal. And the details of how to sign up for that have been shared in the chat. So if you're interested in that, or if you have had challenges, then you can join us for that. But basically, if you have managed to log into the grant making information portal, then you should be fine. I'll get started now. So Isa, our agenda, as I said, is going to introduce the program very briefly. We can get into a lot of details on that, and then we will focus on snippets of the available evidence on violence prevention, particularly that came from WACS 1. And then we will zero in on the skill grants and who's eligible to apply for those. And then we'll have a session on research, monitoring, and evaluation, and then get into the budget, and then grant agreement and compliance, and how what we are thinking about that, risk management, and the timelines. And then that should take us to the full hour, and we'll have part 2 of questions. We will also attempt to answer some of your questions in the Q&A as we go along. So next slide is that. So what WACS 2 is actually a program that is managed by 2 consortia. And the first consortia is the implementation consortia, which comprises of IRC, International Rescue Committee, Raising Voices, Breakthrough in India, Social Development Direct, and CARE UK. And then we have a partnership with another consortia, that's the research consortia, which comprises of 6 organizations, as you can see from the logos there, the Women's Global Institute at George Washington University, the Children's Institute, the Aga Khan University, John Hopkins, the Equality Institute. And so these 11 organizations are the ones that comprise of the whole WACS 2 program, which is funded by the FCDO. It's a 7-year program that is basically seeking to build on a previous program that was called WACS 1, that sought to invest in generation of evidence on what works to prevent violence against women and girls and in all their diversities. Next slide. So how are we organized as this joint, these 2 consortia? We are organized under around 6 pillars of work. And the first pillar is external engagement and influencing. And this is a pillar that actually seeks to influence how the uptake of evidence is happening. And as we generate new evidence through this program, we will also focus, the EEI, external engagement and influencing, will focus on putting that evidence out there in formats that can be used. We also seek to influence how funding is made for work on violence prevention. So there's advocacy with other funders, advocacy with researchers, advocacy with the field of prevention implementers, so that then we're able to put out the evidence generated. The second pillar is learning partnerships, and this is the pillar under which we are organizing the technical support. So the grantees that will be provided, the grants that will be provided will have accompaniment support through technical assistance. And so this is where we will be focusing on supporting partners to design interventions and evaluate them and implement them in a way that they can actually be evaluated. Then we do have the third pillar on accountability to feminist principles. This program is grounded on feminist principles, and we are aspirational because we do recognize that it's a commercial contract from a bilateral aid, and so we may not be able to provide so flexible call support, but we are aspiring to give partners as much as flexibility as they may need within the project support that they will require to design their interventions. Then we have a violence against women and girls help desk, which is basically a support service that supports FCDO country offices that are interested in designing programs on violence prevention across the globe. And so that is very specific to that support. We have fund management, which is what this call is about, and this webinar, and the grant making. And so this is what is going to be the aspects of which that we are issuing this call for applications, and that we would do the selection and grant making and supporting those partners, and then that we'll select. And then we have the collaboration with the research consortium, as our sixth pillar, because we are working closely together. The research consortium will be providing support in terms of evidence reviews. They will support baseline surveys. They will support impact evaluations, and so working very closely with them to ensure we are aligned, and we are working closely as we partner to support the grantees that will have been selected. So that's how we organize ourselves. Next slide. So what problem is what WACS 2 seeking to address? So we do know that we have proof of concept for effective small scale interventions, and that was evident, that came out very clearly in WACS 1, that some of the interventions that were funded and supported were able to prove that violence is preventable. However, we have limited understanding or experience of scale, and how do we take this work to scale? And so through this initiative, through the grants that we'll make, through this scale grants, then we hope to be able to expand that scope of understanding. We want to be able to know how, in partnership with whoever will be selected, how to go to scale. And so that's what we will be building upon, that knowledge and understanding of how to go to scale. Innovation, again, there's persistent gaps in knowledge and evidence which hampers effective responses. So for instance, from again, the evidence that was generated in WACS 1, there were gaps, especially in how to respond to GBV and violence against women and girls in conflict and crisis situations, and also for marginalized communities. So the innovation grants that, as I said, we did the webinar for last week, are seeking to address that gap. And then there is limited capacity and will to make use of evidence. And so sometimes what we have had through listening consultations that we held earlier this year was that uh, a number of people didn't know where the evidence was, and when the evidence was available, it was in big reports and not synthesized in user-friendly formats. So we hope to be able to do that within this program. So those are the three key issues we are seeking to address within the WACS 2. Next slide, please. So over the 7 years, and the first year is actually about to go. We spent the first year from October last year when we began this program up to now doing inception. And so we've just begun implementation. So inception was 9 months from October to end of June. And now from July, we are in the implementation phase, and we were preparing ground to do this call for applications. So we will be, as I've indicated, supporting learning partnerships for long-term capacity to deliver violence prevention. We will be supporting innovative and testing new ideas on violence prevention. We will use evidence to influence an effective and coordinated global response to end violence. And then we will scale proven approaches to violence through the skill grants. So let's move on. Next slide, please, Isa. So what did we learn from WACS 1? We did learn that actually violence prevention is possible. And in some of the interventions that were funded in WACS 1 in DRC, Zambia, Ghana, Rwanda, Tajikistan, the evidence that emerged was that violence was actually reduced by up to 50% in a span of 2 to 3 years. And so really, as you can see, that a community-based project in rural Ghana was able to actually halve the incidence of violence. So that shows that it is possible and it can be done if there's consistency in supporting funding in those interventions that are working and innovating new ones. And so that's the evidence. Let's move on to the next slide. We also found that combined economic and social empowerment interventions that they take gender transformative approaches were found to actually work. We also found evidence and interventions around community activism approaches that were aiming to shift harmful social norms and support, combining that with support to survivors. The other thing that was found to work was school-based interventions using participatory approaches. Cash transfers were found to work, but not as single interventions. They needed to sort of be merged and combined with other interventions. And then programs with couples and parenting interventions were also found to have worked. There was insufficient evidence in interventions in the workplace, so harassment, sexual harassment in the workplace, edutainment, mass media, marketing campaigns. There wasn't robust evidence to support that they are effective in reducing GBV on their own, so they would probably have to be combined with other interventions. Psychotherapeutic interventions, including cognitive behavioral therapy, again, was evidence was not sufficient that it works as a standalone. Again, police and justice sector interventions on their own were not, there was insufficient evidence about their ability to reduce violence. And then programs with men and boys only, again, there was insufficient evidence to prove that they work. And again, there was insufficient evidence on conflict-related sexual violence. And so then the ineffective interventions based on the studies that were done in What Works One, economic empowerment alone didn't work, and brief bystander interventions. And so putting this out there, and this evidence can actually be found on the What Works 2 website, and also on What Works One website, which is still up and running. And we are putting this out there so that people have a sense of what the kind of evidence and what kind of interventions are, because for skill, we are looking to support interventions that have been proven to work. So let's move to the next slide, please. So again, I said we are guided and inspired by feminist principles, and so we want to be accountable to the field of prevention, and so we believe in a feminist approach to violence prevention, and that it's at the heart of the work to transform the core drivers of violence against women. And so we want to partner in fostering activism with the partners that do get selected. We will strive to do no harm. We also hope partners will apply a gender power analysis as we work together with them, and that the interventions that people apply for will also consider intersecting layers of exclusion. So the feminist principles is basically what we expect to see in the applications, and also what we are aspiring to. So the skill, yeah, let's go. I'm seeing the French translation is not working. Becky?
Yeah, I'm just responding in the chat now.
All right, okay, thank you. So then how are we defining skill? Let's move on to the next one. So we are looking at scale as expanding or deepening evidence-based violence against women and girls prevention programming and policy efforts in partnership with organizations, institutions, and communities who share commitment to sustainable change. So next slide, please. So really, interventions in terms of how the how of this, we are looking at interventions that would deepen impact by expanding the scope or actors involved, and so it ought to have been already tried. We are looking at interventions that would be between 3 to 5 years in duration. We are looking at adapting and replicating proven interventions to a new setting or a new population. So if you have something that has been tried in the past and found to work, and that could be scaled up, then in a new setting or with new populations, we will be happy to receive that. Expanding an effective intervention, it's in its original setting. So again, you could decide to still apply to expand something that you already tried as an innovative idea, was proven to work, and now you want to take it to scale within the same setting. And again, we are looking at partnerships with organizations, institutions, and communities who share a commitment to sustainable change. And I will speak a little bit more on this. So let's move on, Issa. So eligibility criteria, who's eligible to apply? So applicants could include a mix of women's rights organizations who are program implementers, as well as INGOs, as well as multilaterals, as well as SMEs. So we have a broad range for scale in terms of who can apply for these grants. Applicants who choose to do it in consortia should include at least one women's rights organization from the Global South. And so so we are looking at, as we have said, this program and building on what works one. A lot of the interventions that were found to work were found in the Global South, and so some of the innovations are happening there. And so we are that's the reason why we are emphasizing that women's rights organizations be part of the consortia. And then we expect that they will co-lead the design. The women's rights organization will be part of co-leadership of the design, implementation, learning of the interventions that will be proposed. Again, the willingness to work flexibly with the projects in terms of design, adaptation, and assessments. As I said, we have a whole research arm that will be working with the partners that are selected to determine the research agenda, what are the research questions that the intervention seeks to address, or what are the research questions the field needs to answer. And so we are looking at openness to partner with us to be able to determine those research questions, as well as participating in an evaluation process. We are also looking at partners located in very broad regions, Middle East and North Africa, Asia, very broadly, including the Pacific, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. And again, funding organizations are not eligible to apply because we are not looking at giving funds to grant. We are looking at giving funds for direct implementation. And again, organizations are only eligible to apply for one Works 2 project in each funding cycle. And we will have another funding cycle in 2025. Next slide, please. So in terms of selection criteria for scale grants, what are we looking for? Effectiveness is one of the criteria, and we are looking at a clear intervention model for prevention. We are looking at an intervention that has meaningfully and statistically significant, has shown significant reduction in violence outcomes through a previous randomized control trial, or if there is not an RCT, then there is previous rigorous testing in lower and middle income countries. And then, of course, it has to demonstrate plausible pathways such as gender attitudes, household decision making, and that there is actually this change that has happened in those. We are looking at interventions that will also be able to have analysis of trial data that has happened in the past and the impact of that in those interventions. Implementation information on implementation quality, such as fidelity to the intervention, such as attendance, engagement, data from participants, things that can actually prove that that intervention has been tested and found to be effective. The next criteria we will be looking at in selection, next slide, would be cost effectiveness. And so is the intervention cost effectiveness, and is there data to support that? Does it demonstrate plausible means to achieving economies of scale? So again, that's another criteria. Scale and sustainability is the third criteria. The project should demonstrate a clear pathway to scale, either by reach or proportion of population covered. And it also describes how the intervention could be sustained beyond the life of the project. And of course, then we are looking at how gender transformative the intervention would be. and that it would lead to greater sustainability beyond the life of the project. We also have a fourth criteria, an enabling environment. So we do recognize that there are some environments that may not be very conducive for purposes of interventions. So applicants need to sort of understand their context and environment and know whether it's conducive for scale up. And then that the environment presents a window of opportunity where this funding could be catalytic and catalyze other funding to the interventions. And then the other thing is the learning, the enabling environment for learning, so that we can fill the evidence gaps that are prevalent in the field of prevention. Next slide, please. And then the final criteria we are looking at is where accountability to feminist principles and whether the project includes mechanisms for remaining accountable to communities and stakeholders they work with, whether it includes support of building equitable relationships with women's rights organizations and the communities where the work will happen, a positive work culture that doesn't tolerate any type of violence within the institutions that will be implementing, and whether the project strives to be inclusive and acknowledges and empowers and addresses the unique needs and challenges faced by the most vulnerable groups that it's working with. And for scale-up interventions originally designed by an organization outside this consortia, as I said when we started, we have an 11-member consortia. So this particular point is important because 10% of the budget of the TA support should be budgeted for to be provided by the originator. And what I mean by that, if you want to scale up an intervention that has been tried, say for instance, if I'm going to use IRC as an example, that IRC has an intervention that they have tried and it has been found to be effective and you want to scale it up, then you need to budget for 10% for originator TA, so that then the originator of the model that you're scaling up can be able to offer that. And on top of that, we'll be able to offer also support to the TA.
Donc, pour aussi appuyer exactement le TA, prochain slide.
Some French, the French translation is...
Yeah, give me 1 minute. Hi, Ibrahim, thanks for joining.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Sorry.
No worries, rejoining. I'm just going to have to reset. You've dropped off as an interpreter, so I'll reset you up.
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes.
Oh my God.
And I'll let you know. I'll let you know when to start talking again.
All right, sorry. So give us a minute.
Sorry.
Back the interpreter.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. All right, carry on, Anne.
All right. Actually, at this point in time, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Catherine Farb, to talk about the research, monitoring, and evaluation. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Anne, and hi, everybody. So Anne had mentioned that one of the important components of the What Works scaling grants is the ability to pair it with different research designs from our partners from the Research Consortium. And that process will be co-designing a fit-for-purpose research question and evaluation to generate learning and evidence about the proposed scaling opportunities. And so it can be either operational research or even potentially impact research at scale. So a lot of space to co-design that. In addition, we'll be collaborating with different technical advisors across What Works 2 for different learning partnerships to also co-design, field test, monitor, and refine the different scaling projects. With that said, while we'll have a lot of research partners and support in place, the grantees themselves will be responsible for collecting information for monitoring, evaluation, and learning components. And it's important to note when you think through your applications as well that the budget for the evaluation will actually be covered by this other research consortium, so you don't need to worry about what you'll be submitting at this stage for the research component. Next slide, and then over to my colleague, Dima.
Thank you so much. So now we will speak more about the monitoring and evaluation specifically. In our program, we have mainly 3 outcomes, and we are expecting from any applicant to be at least provide a project coincide with 2 or more of these outcomes. Starting from the first one, first outcome is a measurable reduction in violence against women and girls because of what's work funded project, and this could be in the development and humanitarian context. The second one is the change in the practice or the policy. This could include the policies, programs, and funding mechanism. And the third one is the recognition of the women rights organization as an essential actor in prevention of the violence, which lead to improve the access to funding. So we have mainly 3 outcomes, and you are expecting that any design, any program, or any applicant to be the intervention to be coincide with at least 2 of these outcomes. Next, please. And then we are also expecting in the stage of the fully proposal, which in this case, to provide the project log frame and theory exchange, and those should be coincide with the HCDO template, which is already provided. And definitely in the applicant monitoring and evaluation plan, we are expecting that there will be a good and high level of understanding of gender, power and context, learning and evidence of how prevention of the violence against women and girls, and definitely taking in consideration what's work principle of violence against women and girl prevention. This is for the NFE, and now handed to my colleague.
Thank you, Dima. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on how you're joining us from. And I'll be taking us through the budget making process. If you have seen the request for proposal document, we had included a template, a budget template, which ideally or which we suggest that you use when you're submitting your budget. In that budget template, we had 6 budget headings. Will take us through the 6 budget headings, and the first one is the project activities. Under this, we expect to see costs that are linked to the achievement of the project outputs. They are mainly recurrent project delivery expenditure, and they are unrelated to admin costs, staff costs, or even monitoring and evaluation, because those are covered under a different subject. The next one is on capital expenditure. Basically, these are the funds that will be used for purchase of assets. By an asset, we mean an item that has a useful life of more than 1 year. You may use your organization's own definition of what constitutes an asset, but as long as that item has been costed under capital expenditure, there are some expectations. Some of them is that, one, you will be expected to have a report on that asset, on the management of that asset, at least once every year. Also, according to the FCDO, it is important to note that the ultimate ownership lies with FCDO because they are the funders, but at the end of the grant, there is possibility of that asset being transferred to the grantee. Another way for you to define your assets will be the value or the cost, and we are defining any cost that is above £500 as an asset. There are also some items which, when put together, and the cost of which may amount to £500, and those items will also be classified as assets for the purposes of this budget. They include items such as relief packs, pharmaceutical products, or even food items. Other items which are considered what we call attractive items, regardless of their costs, such as mobile phones, cameras, laptops, tablets, satellite phones, are all classified under capital expenditure. The next category is on staff costs, and here we typically include staff salaries, pensions, staff bonuses if they're applicable, payroll taxes, and such. It also includes costs around consultants that may be hired to support the project. The next category is on monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And you will have seen again from our guidance that we do expect as a grantee or an applicant that you're going to ring fence up to 10% of your total budget to cover for costs around that. As my colleague have stated, there is a research component on this project for what works too. However, when it comes to baseline data collection, that's supposed to be covered by the grantee or the applicant. The next category is advocacy and influencing activities. And again, here we have set up to 10% to be ring-fenced from your total budget to cover for advocacy and influencing activities, including the likelihood of this project being presented in global fora. Last but not least of the budget headings is the other admin costs. And these are costs of grant support through head office administration. We expect costs and are here to be appropriate and justifiable, an apportionment of the total organizational costs that are applicable to this particular project. Two main things to note about the costs that will be considered under admin is that one, this must be based on actual expenditure, and they must be evidenced by supporting documentation. For example, if you're apportioning a portion of your rent to this program, we would expect that to be accompanied by a receipt as supporting or evidence. Another thing to note is that it is not acceptable to charge a fixed figure as admin costs. For example, you cannot set up maybe 80,000 or 100,000 and call that your admin costs. You can also not charge a flat rate based on the size of the grant. For example, you cannot take 5% or 10% or any other and charge that as your admin costs to this project. Next slide, please. Thank you, Isa. On the next slide, again, with the request for proposal, we have given what you're calling the eligible cost guidance as has been issued by the FCDO. In this eligible cost guidance, there is a list of some of the costs that you may charge to this program and what is ineligible. In this slide, we are presenting you with some of the costs that are generally unacceptable. This is not an exhaustive list. If you go through the guidance, the list is more detailed, but some of the examples are given here include fundraising, advocacy, retainer fees, contingency, debt repayment. All those are examples of some of the costs that are not acceptable, and therefore we would not expect them as part of the costs. Some of the project-specific acceptable costs include program support costs, that is things like administration, things that are directly associated with project delivery, your finance costs, logistics, and such. Other program management costs, such as planning and managing salaries and allowances, including direct or what we call frontline program delivery costs, payment to your TA, monitoring and evaluation, transport security. Those are costs that are eligible. When it comes to the non-project attributable costs, we expect to see costs around your IT infrastructure, finance and accounting, oversight of the program, legal, human resources, and such others. My colleague will also be posting a link for the eligible cost guidance so that if you have not seen it, you can familiarize yourself with what is eligible and what is ineligible as a cost. Next slide, please. We also have a category that we are calling the non-project attributable costs, or NPAC. And these are costs that are not feasibly allocable to a single project. They are costs that are incurred by an organization in order to support the project that it runs, such as, for example, space and premises costs. They are also referred to as indirect, core, overhead, central, or even support costs. When it comes to how you calculate your NPAC, the amount of impact that can be funded by FCDO should be an appropriate apportionment, and it is calculated as a percentage of core overhead costs deemed necessary to support your organization's charitable activities. Going out with the RFP, our budget template includes a template which you can use to calculate your NPAC. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a template that we have issued with our budget guidance, and it can help you calculate your NPAC. There are three main sections in this template. Section 1 allows you to calculate what you're calling the direct to indirect cost predicted overhead allocation. It is important to note that this is calculated on a 3-year rolling average. So how you do that is first you list your direct organizational cost for year 1, 2, 3, and then you get an average by dividing that by 3. You then list your indirect costs as per your audited accounts. And these are mainly classified as admin expenses, support staff costs, and governance costs. Again, for 3 years, and get an average for the year. Once you have that, you divide your direct over your indirect costs to come up with the percent that you're going to use to apportion those costs. You then move on to section 2. Again, you're going to calculate your 3-year rolling average of your NPAC cost for the whole organization. So under this section, you will list all your expenses, again classified as admin, support, and governance for 3 years. So for example, we have given you some of the examples that can relate to this, but this is not an exhaustive list. It can include rent, rates and utilities, maintenance, equipment, and such costs. Once you identify your average, again by listing that for the 3 years and getting an average, you will now move to your section 3, where you will use the percentage that you already calculated, your direct to indirect cost percentage, and then you'll use your average per year, and you'll come up with what amount is supposed to be charged to the program. It's supposed to be charged to the project for this particular program. Next slide, please. When it comes to exchange rates, your budget should be provided in pounds. We recommend that you use OANDA to get the exchange rate, and always use the date, or rather show the date when the OANDA exchange rate was gotten. The NPAC should be completed in your local currency, mainly because we expect that you're going to be using your audited accounts. But we do expect that you will provide your budget in pounds. You will therefore have the budget amounts in your local currency. You will have another column showing your exchange rate and then the converted amount in pounds. The budget remains fixed, but because the exchange rate is variable, we do expect that there will be fluctuating rates. It is important to note that the grantee is expected to bear the exchange rates. When significant exchange rate gains or losses are being accumulated, the partner will notify the fund manager, and they will jointly decide how this can be managed. In case of adverse movements, the partner working with the fund manager will consider a range of options, including reassessing the outcome deliverables or seeking additional budget through dialogue with FCDO. Partners should not build in additional costs to protect against the risk of exchange rate. Therefore, we will not expect in your budget to see a line for a risk or a contingency for exchange rate losses. Next slide, please. So these are just some tips that can help you when you're formulating your budgets. Keep the fund manager regularly informed of forecast spent during the lifetime of the grant arrangement. Repeated high variance against forecast is seen as a consequence of weak financial management. You're required to retain all your invoices, receipts, and accounting records relating to the project funds for a period of 5 years after the expiry of the grant arrangements. Please ensure that project funds are properly accounted for. We do expect that you'll have adequate financial management, including adequate controls, accountability structures, and procedures to ensure transparency. All items of expenditure must conform to the principles above and should be allowable within the agreed budget and also in alignment with the eligible cost guidance. Please ensure that the project funds are not used in violation of any relevant laws. Thank you. I'll be now hand over to my colleague Teresa to take us through grant agreement and compliance.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I'll be covering the grant management, the grant contracts, so the AGA, and also the risk register. So the grant agreement, so all the selected grantees will be doing a contract with a countable grant agreement. The scale grants are up to the amount of £4 million for a term between 3 to 5 years. As the fund manager, the International Rescue Committee will sign the AGAs on behalf of FCDO. And these accountable grant agreements usually outlines the following: the eligible expenditure, the fund disbursements, quarterly narrative and financial reporting, the due diligence recommendations, monitoring, delivery chain mapping of downstream partners, audit, risk management, assets, and communications. Next slide, please. The successful selected lead grantees must undergo a due diligence assessment of the grantee's capacity to implementation of the proposed project and receive the FCDO funds. The purpose of this collaborative review is to identify any development needs and assign actions to mitigate against any risks to the FCDO funding. There are two stages for this due diligence. The first one is the basic eligibility screening, vetting at the application stage. And you will see this number of questions as you start completing the application form on this. And then there's the second stage is the partner project capacity review. And this is after the grantees have been selected. And the grantee will provide documentation to the grant management team and then participating in a few meetings to review any areas of the assessment. The results of these due diligence will include any risk mitigation, special conditions, and will be submitted to the FCDO. And this will also provide us approval to move to the contracting stage. And as I mentioned previously, will be part of the accountable grant agreement. Next slide. So this is the risk management. Next slide, please. So the project risk management, this is quite a critical area for any FCDO funded grants. The grantees will be expected to proactively identify and manage any risks that could impact on the implementation of the project by developing a project risk register, outlining risks and risk mitigation. The template has been provided. Please do submit it with the application. And this risk register should be updated and submitted as part of your quarterly reporting. Some of the two key areas of risk for the FCDO funding is around aid diversion and fraud and safeguarding. So on the aid diversion and fraud, the FCDO operates a zero tolerance approach towards corruption, fraud, and uses of funds within WhatWorks grant portfolio. And WhatWorks team will work with grant holders to minimize and mitigate the risks of fraud, including maintaining risk registers, and ensuring if fraud occurs to report it immediately through this email address. And again, this will be shared as part of your accountable grant agreement. On safeguarding, again, FCD operates on a zero tolerance approach for inaction to tackling sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment. And grantees and implementing partners will prevent any CL linked to the delivery of the project and will apply international standards and promptly report any concerns to the email provided. A safeguarding and induction and training will be provided for all the selected grantees. Okay, next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and this is on the timeline for scaling innovation projects timeline for the concept note and request for proposals. So the RFPs have been released at the end of July. The application submission windows is open until September. For the scale grant is until the 23rd of September. Then the selection panel will occur between the end of September and October and November. And we will confirm the outcomes in due diligence expect in November, December. If all goes well, we will be the FCDO approval and the grant startup phase will start in Q1 of 2023. And next slide, please. Thank you very much. And now I'll hand over to Anne, who will lead us to the questions and answers session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. And I think we have quite a number of questions that have been put in the Q&A. So, Becky, how do you want us to do this?
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for the presentation. I think I've been reviewing the questions in the chat as we go. I think other members of the team have as well. So some of them will hopefully already have been answered, and you should be able to see in the answered column in the chat which those questions are. So feel free to look through those. But I will now run through the Q&A box and try and collate questions. I'll ask them out loud now, and we'll do some live answers of those. We can also go to hands up as well. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and come to you once we've run through some of the questions which are currently in the Q&A box. So just to start, I can see there have been quite a few questions around sharing the presentation and the recording. This, just to clarify, we will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation slides as well as this webinar, which is currently being recorded. Those will be shared on our website, so please check the website for those very shortly. In the next day or so, they'll be uploaded. The next question, we've had quite a few questions come through about location and kind of geographic preferences for this opportunity. I don't know if Teresa, I know you've answered a few questions in the chat, but it might be useful for you to come in here and just clarify on geographic areas for this funding.
I was unmuted. Of course. So the three priority areas, as indicated in the request for proposals guidance notes, are the Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Middle East and North Africa. The list of ODA recipient countries can be found on our website, and also the list of the fragile and affected countries can also be found on our website. I can share the link again if needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. And then one for Leah. I think there's been a couple of questions around the total budget. So Leah, maybe you could just come in and clarify the total budget for the scale-up grants, and also whether there's a maximum or a minimum ceiling as well. Thank you.
Hello. So when you're preparing your budget, that will be determined by the kind of activities or the objectives that you're setting up. We have only defined two types of budgets. That's around monitoring, evaluation, and lesson learning. And we have recommended that you set up or you ring fence up to 10% of your total budget for activities around monitoring, evaluation, and lesson learning. Mainly the main it's only mainly around the baseline. It's around the baseline survey that the grantee will be expected to conduct, because as we have said, we do have a research component that will be carrying out research around the program. Another budget category that we have cut off is around the advocacy and influencing activities. Again, here we have said you should ring fence about 10% of your total budget. We should be covering those sort of activities. When it comes to your staff costs, the project activities, capital expenditure, and all that, we are leaving it up to you as an applicant to define, because that will be based on the kind of activities that you do want to achieve. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah, that's great. The next question we've been getting an awful lot of is how many scale-up grants are available under this window, and will there be another funding round and with more grants available at that point, and when would that be? I don't know if Anne, maybe that one's best for you.
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that. So we have two funding windows, and this is window 1. The window 2 will be in 2025, 3 years from now. how much funding? We have 3 scale grants of up to 4 million each. So, I mean, that's the funds that are available for this window. We are also considering looking at interventions from Works One and having invite-only grants. All the final numbers will basically be determined based on the applications we receive, the review, and yeah, looking at. We've already seen, for instance, for innovation, some applications that are less than the 500,000, so we don't know whether that will happen. So we are considering invite only for interventions that were in Works One, and now this open competition. So I hope that answers it, for a duration of 3 to 5 years.
Thanks, Anne. And another question we've been getting a bit of is around the difference between scale and innovation. I don't know if, Anne, maybe you could give a bit of clarity on that, so organisations can know which sort of grant type their work might fit better within.
Okay, thank you for that question. So innovation, and we did the webinar for it last week. For innovation grants, they are 500,000 per grant, up to 500,000 per grant. And the difference we are looking at is innovation. We are looking at ideas that can actually be tested to and prove to work. So if you have a good idea that you think if you implement it, it will actually yield results in reducing or preventing violence. We are open to that, and that's why we are calling it innovation. We are looking for innovative ideas that can actually be carried out, implemented, and then have the ability after they are evaluated to show a reduction or a prevention of violence. For scale, these are interventions that have already been implemented. They have been tried through either rigorous evaluations or randomized controlled trials. They have been proven to work, and that is what we want to take to scale. So for instance, if you did a project in a small community that was tried and found to work, and now you want to scale it to a larger sort of geographical area, reaching more people, that's what scale is about, scaling interventions that have already been proven to work. So I hope that distinction helps, but happy to also ask you to look at our webinar on innovation, so that where we also defined what we mean by innovation. But it's looking for good ideas that you think once you implement them and test them, they will have the capacity to reduce violence.
Thanks, Anne. Next few questions around the kind of types of organisations that can apply. So we've obviously mentioned a focus on women's rights organisations and women-led organisations, but could we please clarify whether applicants can be non-women-led NGOs, or is it exclusively for women-led only NGOs or women's rights organisations that can apply?
All right. Yes, also happy to take that one. So for innovation grants, the focus is women-led women's rights organizations that have to take the leadership, and then they can decide whether they want to apply alone or in consortia. For scale, it's not necessarily women-led women's rights organizations. We have other kind of applicants like INGOs. However, we do require that you incorporate one women's rights organization in the co-design and of the intervention. So that's the distinction, that for scale, you don't necessarily have to be a women-led organization, but you will need to incorporate a women's rights organization in your co-design. For innovation, women-led women's rights organizations apply.
Thanks, Anne. And then another question on types of organisations, this time around INGOs. So could an INGO apply alone? And can INGOs working in partnership with local implementing agencies, is that model applicable for this round of funding as well?
So an INGO cannot apply alone. They would need to incorporate a women's rights organization in the application. If they have one that they already work with already, that's fine. If they don't, they probably will need to form a partnership with them.
Thanks, Anne. And then a question, I suppose, more generally about any organisation. Can any organisation apply alone, or must applications be made in consortia?
Again, if they choose to apply, they would need to sort of have a women's rights organization in the partnership for scale. So yeah, I think it's the same point I've made in the last two answers, that say an INGO decides to apply, they will need to incorporate a women's rights organization and in the co-designing and implementation of the intervention.
Thanks, Anne. And then a question on funding organisations. Please, can we elaborate on what we mean by a funding organisation and whether funding organisations are eligible to apply?
So what we mean by funding organizations, for instance, if you're a women's fund that takes money and grants to other organizations, then you're not eligible, because we are looking at directly supporting interventions that are doing the work, that will be doing the implementation. So if you are a granting organization, then you're not eligible. However, we do recognize in a consortia, you will need to agree on how money is going to be shared and split. And that is a different kind of relationship. That's not regranting, because you'll outline in the application, this is how we intend to do the work. This is the role of each of the applicants. But if their intention is to apply for funds and then do around a call for applications or invite applicants to apply, then that the fund is not going to be funding those kind of applications.
Thanks, Anne. The next question is around organisations that weren't part of the What Works 1 phase of this programme. Are all organisations invited to apply, even if they weren't involved in the first phase in What Works 1?
Yes, yes, this fund is not just restricted to organizations that participated in What Works 1. It's open. It's open to all applications as long as they are in the eligible regions and the FCDU eligible countries, as Teresa mentioned. So not restricting this just to those who were involved in What Works 1, but opening it up to more possibilities.
Thanks, Anne. And then within the What Works 2 phase, are organisations able to apply for the various different funding cycles that What Works 2 will have? So there'll be another funding cycle in 2025, and if you apply during this current funding cycle, are you still eligible to apply in the next funding cycle?
To be honest, we haven't determined how What Works 2 will look like. That's 2025, because a lot will be determined by our experiences and learning from What Works 1. I mean, this window 1. So we have 2 windows. So we haven't determined what window 2 will look like. And so I would say that's not a question I can answer right now, whether or not an organization can apply now and apply in window 2. It will be determined by whatever learnings that are emerging from window 1 applications.
Thanks, Anne. I'm just going to move now quickly to a couple of more detailed budget questions. So Leah, it might be useful if you come in on these, but questions around the different budget categories within the budget template, and whether there are kind of percentages of across those categories in terms of total percentages that we could allocate to the different categories that you mentioned.
Thanks, Becky. So one of the questions is around admin costs, and we are saying that these costs are grant support through head office administration. So these are costs that are intended to cover an appropriate and justifiable apportionment of the applicant's admin costs expended in support of the grant, and where these costs have not been put under other budget classifications. So between your admin costs and what you're calling NPAC, the non-project attributable costs, it's important to be careful so that there's no duplication, such that if you have already charged a certain amount as part of your admin costs to cover things such as maybe rent of premises or other support that the grant could be getting from, say, your head office, then we do not expect that again you will use that cost when you're calculating your NPAC. We do not have thresholds in terms of the various budget categories. So we are not going to be prescribing to the applicants how much of their budget should be allocated to the various budget headings. We expect that that will be informed by your own objectives, what you're trying to achieve, and the costs of achieving those objectives. We have only 2 budget headings have what we can call, what we are calling ring fence amounts. These are amounts that are set aside and should only be used to cover costs relating to those 2 headings. And those are around monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and also advocacy and influencing activities. I don't know if I've answered all that you asked, Becky. I've managed to answer a few more directly on the chat.
Great, thanks, Leah. And yeah, just a reminder that anyone should be able to view in the chat the questions that have been answered. So please do check there as well in case your questions have been answered, or if there are sort of relevant questions as well that have been answered that you would also find useful. We've had a few questions around in terms of the application, the various different documents that are required. Teresa, I don't know if you could, I think you've answered some of these questions in the chat, but maybe you could come in and just clarify what different documents are required and are needed to be sent through alongside the full proposal for this application.
Sure, thank you, Becky. So on our website, you will find a number of guidance notes, but none of the templates and required annex are on our website. For that, you will need to register and log in on the IRC grants portal. And then once you have registered, you will see the 2 funding cycles that are currently open, one for the innovation grants and one for the scale grants. You should go to the scale grants if you are intending to apply for the scale grants. And there you have 2 tabs, one with the general information and then with a file tab. On that file tab, you will see all the annexes that are required is the budget, the log frame, the risk register, and we'll be adding another one very soon on the delivery chain mapping. I'm just still working on that one. So we will see all of them there. If you, for any reasons, you can't see all of them, please select view all, and then you'll have access to all the files and required annexes that are needed to be submitted alongside your application form. If you have any issues in accessing any of these documents, please do let us know and do email us on the whatworks2 info email. I'll share it on the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. Another question around kind of eligibility, maybe for you, Leah, is are there any requirements for organisations to have a specific kind of revenue? Similarly, are organisations to have been are required to have been registered for a minimum amount of time, for example, registered for 1 year at least? So yeah, revenue limit for organisations and also sort of length of time that they've been registered. don't know if you can clarify those.
Thanks, Becky. When it comes to the revenue amount that the organizations are required to have been working with, we have not set a threshold for that. Of course, we will expect that you will be able to show that as an organization, you have the resources and you have the capacity to implement what you'll be putting forward. That's the requirement we have around that, but not in terms of budgets or the revenue amount. If you look at how we are calculating NPAC and others, we are looking at your 3 years rolling average. So if it will be expected that we'll be looking at your audited accounts for those last 3 years. However, if you look at the request for proposals, and I will allow my colleague Anne to come in on this, it is that we do expect that you're registered and you probably have been in operation. But if you do not have those, for example, you do not have audited accounts for those last 3 years, then we will expect that you will have a justification or a reason why that is not available, so that it can be looked at during vetting. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. And then maybe another question for you actually is around advocacy. It's listed both under allowable and disallowable costs, I think, in slightly different ways. Are you able to clarify which advocacy activities are eligible within the budget?
Yes, thank you. So when we say ineligible costs, advocacy costs are listed there. We are talking about advocacy costs around bid preparation. So that is not an eligible cost. But when it comes to advocacy, after you're a successful grantee, all activities under advocacy, in fact, we are recommending that you set up to 10% of your budget. Advocacy is going to be a key element of the What Works 2 program. So that's an eligible cost. So the difference is you cannot charge the advocacy costs during bid preparation, but as part of your program activities, that is an eligible cost. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. I'll move on to a couple of questions we've had come through around scale and actually the sort of scaling interventions themselves. So one of those questions is, if an applicant proposes to scale up an intervention piloted by another organisation, does that applicant need to inform that organisation during the proposal stage and then work with them during the proposal stage as well? I don't know if Anne, maybe you could take that one.
Yes. So if an applicant wants to scale up an intervention, already developed a model or an intervention designed and tried by organization X, there is a requirement that you notify. We are calling the originator. The originator, that's the originator of the intervention or the model that you want to scale up. And so we expect that you will inform organization X that this is the I'm scaling up your model, and actually budget some funds for that originator TA, unless of course the originator decides or tells you they don't want to be involved or they aren't interested in providing originator TA. But the requirement is that you should notify them and be able to budget some funds to get that originator advice and TA around the model.
Thanks, Anne. Another question on kind of how to take things to scale, around if an organisation wasn't part of an intervention previously, but has maybe similar projects being implemented, are they able to use learnings from those other projects or from those other donor-funded projects to apply for scale-up grants? I think similarly, I guess if they've been implementing projects in a different context or in a different country, are they able to adapt those and apply for this scale-up funding?
Yes, thanks, Betty. Absolutely. If you're implementing an intervention that was probably originated in Uganda and you're doing it in Ghana or Liberia or wherever, and you have evidence to show that it actually works, you are completely welcome to apply. So yes, it should be. It's not just restricted to the interventions that were in Works One, as long as you're able to demonstrate. And in the application form, there's a question that actually requires you to show that this has actually been proven to work. And so you will supply us the evidence of the model and the intervention that you're proposing to scale or deepen or adapt in a different context. So adaptations, deepening, expansion are all part of how we are defining scale. So they are welcome to apply.
Thanks, Anne. And then I think slightly linked to those questions is around what do we mean by an intervention that's been proven to work? So yeah, what does that mean in terms of available data? And yeah, what does proven to work mean, I suppose, to take to scale?
So proven to work means that the intervention has or the project has in the past been evaluated, and that there is data that shows that it has been evaluated. And evaluation does take many forms. As long as you have credible data that shows that it's been evaluated. It could be a randomized control trials, but we are also saying that we also are looking at other different kinds of evaluation. It's the onus is to prove that it has been shown to work in reduction or prevention of violence. And so if you do have an intervention that proven to work, means that it's actually been evaluated and shown to reduce or prevent violence. So I hope that's clear.
Thanks, Anne. And then a question, we've had a couple of questions which are perhaps more linked to our innovation grant funding, but a couple of questions around what about sort of other innovative ideas that haven't yet been tested? Can organizations try something completely new under what works too? I think it's probably more relevant for the innovation grants, but Anne, I'll pass to you to clarify.
Absolutely, yes. Those innovative ideas that you think you have, that and even if they haven't been tried and evaluated, but you think they have ability and capacity to reduce violence, and you're open to having them evaluated, then those qualify for innovation grants. So I would recommend that you actually visit our website, I believe, where we have already posted the webinar that we did last week on innovation, and also the documents that we have put out in the RFP, and those would be good ideas to submit under innovation.
Thanks, Anne. We've also had a couple of questions on types of violence. So are we able to elaborate on how we define violence against women and girls, and are there any priority areas, I suppose, so sexual violence or conflict related violence that we're focusing on under this funding?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Again, under innovation, we were actually able to highlight the different types of violence we are focusing on. So we are looking at for innovation, we are looking at ideas on sexual violence, intimate partner violence, non-intimate partner violence, ideas on conflict-related sexual violence that are innovative, and so basically that's where the gaps of evidence are that we are seeking to fill with the innovation grants. For scale up, similarly, I think the types of violence we are looking is intimate partner violence, non-intimate partner violence, conflict related sexual violence, and so it's a wide range of different types of violence in different contexts that where we need to build and increase the evidence base.
Can I just add to that, and if that's okay? And you will see on our website, and I just post that on our chat, there is a guidance note on the types of violence that will guide you on how to complete the application. If you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Can you post it on the chat, Teresa?
Yes, I've done that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, both. So another question that's come through is, are organisations able to apply with their own research partners, or are they expected to apply as implementers and then be provided a research partner from within the What Works 2 research consortia?
Yes, there will be. So applicants will be provided with a research partner from the What Works 2 research consortium partners, so they don't need to procure or get a different research partner in their application. So yeah, that will be support that will be available from the list of the research partners that we have outlined here, who are members of the What Works 2 consortium. And so we hope to engage with the applicants who get selected to start conversations on partnership with the research consortium.
Thanks, Anne. Another question here on eligibility criteria. Are organisations able to apply that are sister organisations to one of the 11 What Works consortium partner organisations?
I wish I understood what sister organization exactly means. So yeah, basically what the response I would give is that the What Works 2 partners, the 11 partners, are not eligible to apply for any of this funding. So what that means is that IRC, which is part of the consortium and which is leading the fund management arm, if there's an office in IRC in a regional or in a region or a country, then they would not be eligible, because then that would be there will be conflict of interest. So yeah, but really, if the person could clarify about what they mean by sister organization, that would be helpful. But just to put out there that all the 11 organizations are not eligible to apply that form this consortium.
Great, thanks, Anne. We've had a question around the kind of split between the invite only and the open competition scale up grants. So one of the questions is, if we've not yet heard that we've been invited as part of the invite only, should we assume that we're not being considered, or is that decision still pending?
That decision is still pending. We are still doing the scoping exercise for possible invite-only applications based on available evidence, and so that's a pending decision. We don't know yet who it is that we'll be inviting for the invite-only.
Thanks, Anne. A question as well now about the focus on kind of conflict and conflict areas. What do we mean by a conflict area or a conflict situation? Would that include, for example, refugee camps or processing centres? And do we have a definition of that context?
Is Catherine Falb on this call? Is Kate, are you still here?
I am. I think we haven't clearly defined what that would mean for our purposes, but I imagine it would be any place where there's displacement or active conflict. So those refugee camps would be eligible. Any internally displaced camps, any populations on the move, or also potentially any areas where it's categorized as a fragile conflict-affected state by the World Bank would be some of the traditional criteria that we would use to analyze it. But I think it would just be based off of how it's described in the application.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you. We've had quite a few questions as well on kind of the application portal itself and various different issues or problems relating to that. Teresa, I don't think here is the place to go into detail and answer all of those, but if you could maybe just kind of flag the webinar tomorrow and how to clarify how to follow up with any issues that people might be having with the portal.
Sure, yes. So I've shared on the chat and you will see it there. We are holding a webinar and a Q&A on the application portal tomorrow at 11:30 to 12:30 GMT. Please follow the link to register your interest. It's just 1 hour. We'll be aiming to cover as many issues as possible, but please bear with us. We might not be able to get to all of the questions we get on this webinar, but please register your interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. And then I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we'll go to hands up and ask people to come in if I've missed anything or misrepresented any of these questions. So last question I'm going to take from the Q&A box is around SCDO and kind of SCDO delays with funding. I think there's been a lot of, you know, people have heard about some delays in SCDO funding recently. Do we know if these delays could affect this program, or is this funding secured already? I don't know if Anne, maybe you're able to take that one if you can.
Yeah, that's a great question. And my response is that we haven't had anything from FCDU that would make us stop the call or to imply that there will be any delays. We are in constant discussions with them, and we are on course, and they know this call has gone out, and so we are all going with the belief that the program is going to land on schedule without any delays, because we've not had any reason from FCDO to make us think otherwise.
Great, thanks, Anne. And actually, just one final question for me to be completely clear. We've had a couple of questions about when the call for applications opens and when the deadline is. I don't know if Teresa, you can just quickly clarify those ones as well.
Sorry, could you repeat the deadline for the scale?
Deadline for scale grants and when they opened as well. I know they're already live, but just to clarify that.
Sure. So they are open since the 29th of July, midnight of 29th of July, and they will be open till the 23rd of September, also till midnight GMT. And that is all of that information is available on our website and also on the portal. As soon as you register, you'll see all of that information there as well.
Great, thanks, Teresa. Okay, so I'm aware I've talked a lot and been pulling these questions through, but I may well have missed some. So we'll spend the last kind of 10 or 15 minutes or so of the webinar going to hands up, if that's okay. So please feel free to put your hand up if you have a question that has not yet been answered, or if you'd like any further clarification. I'll come to the chat now, and I should be able to unmute you and ask you to speak. So I'll just go down the row that I can see. I'll go to Sylvia Fabry. I'll unmute you now. You should be able to unmute yourself. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, it's Sylvia here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So yeah, my question is actually the last question I've typed in the chat box, and it's about clarification on the number of grants that will be awarded through this window, because from the guidelines, it was very clear that it's one grant for up to £4 million. But in answering one of my questions today, where I was asking about if there's only one grant for this window, and then in total there will be a few grants as per the original TOR, and that there will be only one another funding cycle in 2025. So I'm assuming that the next funding cycle in 2025, there will be awarding the remaining grants. But in answering this question, Anne is saying that window 1 will have 3 grants of up to 4 million each, which is very, very different from what we have in the guidelines, where it's clearly one grant this funding cycle. Can you please clarify how many grants you will award in this funding cycle?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to clarify. Yes, for this window 1 for scale, we have 3 grants. 1 is open competition and 2 are invite only. So that makes a total of 3. For innovation, we have 9 grants that are all open competition.
Okay, thanks. It's clear now. Yeah. All clear. And for the invitation only, we still we should consider your answer earlier that you haven't decided how yet.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Anne. Yeah. Okay, I'll go to the next person with a hand up. I've got here Rachel Braden. I'll just unmute you. Please unmute yourself as well and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. Actually, if I may add first a quick follow-up question to what was just discussed. For the invite-only opportunities, would the invitation be based on a submission to the open call, or will it be based on other criteria, including what you're currently looking at in your evaluations? So that's my first question. The second question is about the duration of the proposed project. In the guidance, it said that the project should be 3 years, but one of the moderators today has mentioned a project length up to 5 years. So could you please confirm if it's 3 years or up to 5? If it's up to 5, would a longer intervention have advantages, competitively speaking, over a shorter intervention? Thank you.
I will start with your last question, and yeah, so we as well, we are saying that it has to be at least a minimum of 3 years, but it can't go beyond 5 years. So yeah, so you could decide to have your intervention being 3 years or 4 years. So that's sort of the in between, because we don't want again to be too restrictive and say your intervention must be 3 or must be 5 years. So that's the flexibility that we provide. In terms of the invite only, we will approach based on the scoping exercise that we are currently undertaking. We will approach organizations directly to apply. So at this point in time, we don't know exactly who. So I would say if organizations want to go ahead and put in their application in the open competition, they should go ahead, and then once the scoping is done, we'll be able to know then who it is that we are inviting. And particularly in the invite only, we are hoping to be able to support some of the projects that were found to be successful and can be scaled up from WACS 1.
Thank you.
Sorry, go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I'll move on now. If I go to Saeed, if you have a question, I can see your hand up. Please unmute yourself and then go ahead. We can't hear you yet, Saeed. We've got no sound from you, unfortunately.
Hello.
There you go. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was very useful. I have one question here. I asked during the, I mean, you answered during the live, but I have like further details I need. So for innovation, call for proposal. Okay. You said only woman-led organization can apply, right? Okay, then does that mean like, for example, the CEO should be a woman, or like if it has women in the board of management, stuff like that, does it consider a woman-led? And then my second question is, does the deadlines and apply for both grant and I mean the scale and the innovation? So both dates are like the same, or it has different deadlines, the innovation one? And thank you so much.
Yes, happy to come in on the. Yes, where for innovation grants, the requirement is that the applicant organization or the lead organization is women-led, and what we mean by that, there is majority of women in the leadership of that organization at the board level, at the senior leadership level. So if you have a male CEO and you don't, and well, male CEO alone is not gonna do it. You will need to demonstrate that you have a majority of women in the board and majority of women in senior leadership. And I'll ask Teresa to respond to the timelines for the application submissions.
Thank you. So for the scale grants, the timeline for submitting your proposal is the 23rd of September, midnight GMT. For the innovation grants is on the 5th of September, also midnight GMT. Thank you.
Okay,
And
thank you so much.
yes, and all of that information is available on our website and on our grants portal.
Tamam. Thank you so much.
No worries, thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. Okay, I'll move on. I can see Sylvester, you have your hand up. I'll just unmute you now, please. I think you'll need to unmute yourself as well, but please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a question about the clarification about the number of grants, but it has been answered. Thank you. I'm satisfied now.
Oh, perfect. Great. Thanks, Sylvester. Okay, I'll go next to Yumna. I've just unmuted you. Please also unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I have two questions. The one is about the innovation due date. I just heard the 5th of September. I thought it was 2nd of September on the guidelines. It said 2nd. So I just want a clarification on that. And
You
then
are absolutely right. My apologies. Just yes, there's the 2nd of September. I'm just adding that to the chat. My apologies. Just many dates. Sorry.
Thank you. And then the second one is, we form a partnership, and we have partners. We have a partner in MENA region. We have a partner in South Asia and a partner in Africa that we would like to respond to for our innovation, for their innovation application. Unfortunately, they won't be able to receive the funds, and we will be able to receive the funds, but we are a multilateral. Would that be a problem, or would we just need to write a motivation on that because we've been helping them in that way?
So just to be clear, you're a multilateral organization that wants to apply to support groups in 3 regions?
Yeah, and we are form a partnership. So while we are multilateral, we also form part of the implementation. And so we do work together as a consortium. But one of our big contributions that we bring into the partnership is almost like a fiscal role, where we help with systems development, providing systems and supporting partners on that level, because that's kind of one of our key strengths that we have. But we are not necessarily, we are based actually in the South, but we're not registered in the South. And that's one of our problems we're having, because we've got something we would like to submit, but none of our partners can, because they won't fit your criteria on eligibility in terms of your, the whole breakdown of what will qualify them on that level.
So none of your Global South partners would qualify. And are we talking innovation on scale?
Innovation. Scale, we're fine on scale, but in innovation, we've got 3 partners. We've identified a specific area that we've been working on, and we really would like to expand on this. And the problem is that, and we've running into this problem with previous other grants as well. But that's our strength. But for example, the one, they're not allowed to by policy to do subgranting. The other one is not registered and they're struggling to get registration. And the other one doesn't have the infrastructure to receive so much money. And so for us, that's the strength we offer, in addition to the other areas of implementation that we offer. But we just worried that we won't be able to just apply for this, despite the fact that we've got actually some of it within our partnership.
Yeah, unfortunately for innovation as a multilateral, you wouldn't qualify. It's particularly ring-fenced for women's rights organizations.
No, and they are actually all women's rights organizations. So yeah, okay.
Then support their capacity to be able to apply in window.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. So yeah, okay, that helped me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to, I know we're at time, so I'm going to take one more question from the hands up, and then we'll close, but please do, before we close, write your questions in the Q&A box. If they've not already been answered, we will endeavour to answer all questions that get asked, and update our frequently asked questions document with the answers to those. So if it hasn't been answered yet, please do keep adding to the Q&A box, and we will get to them via the Q&A, the FAQ document. But for a last question in this last few minutes, I'll go to who's next on the list. Sarika, please, can you, I'll unmute you. You should be able to unmute yourself. Please do go ahead.
Hello.
Hello, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah. A very good afternoon to all of you. This is Namrata from World Toilet Organization. My question is, for the Scale Up Program grant, we are an international NGO based in Singapore. My question is, like, for an international NGO who is already working for the prevention of sexual harassment of women through its sanitation programs, So for such organization, is it necessary to have a women-led organization, or a majority of the board should be a women?
So for innovation, if you're asking for scale up, you will need to partner with the women's rights organization. There's that distinction between innovation, where it's women led with majority of women in the leadership. For scale, you need to partner with the women's rights organizations in the design of the intervention.
Okay, it's just during the design of the program, or the throughout the
And implementation.
okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'll close questions there, but appreciate there's been an awful lot and we haven't managed to get to all of them. So please, like I say, continue to ask your questions in the Q&A box. We will collate them all at the end of this webinar and update our frequently asked questions document, which you can find on the website. That will be updated in the next few days with responses to all of the questions that we've been asked today. I'll hand back to Anne now just to close the webinar. Thanks.
Thank everyone for making time to listen to this webinar. We also encourage possible applicants in French and Arabic who didn't get a chance to ask their questions to feel free to send them. Although the application will be in English, we are happy to respond to your questions in either French or Arabic. So do not feel left out. And really, my great honor to thank everyone for your time and for coming onto the webinar. Thank you.